All right, hello everybody, and good afternoon or good morning to the West Coast and Hawaii folks. My name is Ed Carley. I am the Building Program Manager for the National Association of State Energy Officials, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this Building Committee meeting on the American Rescue Plan and K-12 schools. So I'm going to pull up my slides real quick before I start to announce or introduce our panelists. Sorry, folks. We had a quick fire drill where we had to remember to turn on the video for the panelists. So, all right. Set. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. So welcome. Again, my name is Ed Carley. I'm the Building Program Director, and trying to pull up the number of participants here. But anyway, we have a great workshop for you today on the American Rescue Plan and how elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, ESSER or ESSER funds, can be put to use, improving indoor air quality and energy efficiency in K-12 schools across the United States. So we're going to have two panels with a short break in between. We're going to talk about the allowable uses for ESSER funding and how to put the ESSER funding to work in the field with some great speakers. So just real quick background before I hand it off to our two building committee co-chairs. So the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law in March of this year. It provides $122 billion in funding to school districts across the US. Not all of that will go to HVAC projects, but or indoor air quality projects, but we anticipate a chunk of it will, and you'll hear more about that later. There are an additional two bills that provided $165 billion for schools, and then the Senate bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate last week includes another $500 million in funding for schools. So if you take away nothing else from this webinar today, now is a really wonderful time to start reaching out to your colleagues at state education agencies and local education agencies, because there's a flood of funding coming and there is a lot of opportunity. So that's one thing that we really wanted to just emphasize. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my building committee co-chairs. I've got Robin Yoakum and Heather Goggins. Robin joins us from the Nevada Governor's Office of Energy, and Heather is from the Alabama Department of Economic Development and Community Affairs, if I've got ADECA's acronym right. So with that, I'll hand it off.
Thank you, Ed. So before we get started, we just wanted to briefly talk about a couple things. So the United States Government Accountability Office, or GAO, published a study in June of 2020 using data collected before the pandemic. That study found that an estimated 54% of public school districts need to update or replace multiple building systems in their schools. Of those schools, an estimated 41% need to update or replace their heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in at least half of those schools. According to the GAO, this means that about 36,000 schools need HVAC updates. So the American Rescue Plan was passed in March of 2021, and it includes $122 billion in funding for schools. The funds are distributed via formula to state educational agencies, and the State Department of Education and the State Educational Agency is responsible for distributing at least 90% of the funds to local educational agencies, which includes charter schools. So there have been 3 ESSER programs, but they are not identical. There have been ESSER programs in the March 2020 CARES Act, ESSER Fund A, also known as ESSER 1. In December of 2020, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, which is also known as ESSER 2, and then the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ESSER 3. So ESSER funds is about $13.2 billion, which is available for obligation through September 30th of 2021. So that's for the ESSER 1. ESSER 2 is about $54.3 billion, which is available for obligation through September 30th of 2022. And then finally, the ESSER 3, which is $122 billion, is available for obligation through September 30th of 2023.
So all ESSER funding can be for projects that will improve indoor air quality in schools, such as HVAC systems. And the state funding allocations for ESSER range from about $15 billion for California to about $303 million for Wyoming. NASEO's FAQ has a link to the full list of state allocations, and that is listed on page 15. From the NASEO homepage, which is naseo.org, the FAQ can be found under Issues, NASEO COVID-19 Resource Hub, and then Federal Policy. 20% of the funds must be used to address learning loss, but the remaining 80% of funds may be used for a wide range of activities to address needs arising from the pandemic. The allowable uses of ESSER funding, which may improve energy efficiency in schools and therefore may be of interest to state energy offices, include improving indoor air quality, repairing and improving school facilities to reduce the risk of virus transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards, with additional funding for school energy projects expected from the infrastructure bill, which was passed by the U.S. Senate and which is very likely to be passed by the U.S. House and signed into law. This is a really great opportunity for state and territory energy offices to engage with local school districts. Ed?
Had to find the unmute button. Sorry about that. So yeah, thank you. And so now we have a session, and I'm still waiting for one of my panelists to come in. So I've just reached out to her, but we had a request for the FAQ section in the chat. We'll post that. So we're also going to have that in the slides here. I've got it in the resources document that we will distribute at the end of the session. So thanks, Heather and Robin. So I think we're a little bit ahead of schedule. And like I said, my panelist hasn't signed on. So I think we can, oh, thank you, Robin. I see you dropped the FAQ in the chat. Why don't we start with the next panel, and I will work to see if I can get my next panelist on, and we can at least start with some opening statement or an opening statement from Tim. So sorry for the challenge, folks.
So Ed, I know Heather and Robin are involved in the Buildings Committee. As somebody outside of NASEO, could you tell us a bit more about what the Buildings Committee does? Maybe Heather or Robin?
Robin, you want to take that one?
Sure, put us on the spot, Tim.
Why not?
Why not, right? Ed, you know.
So Robin and Heather are really my sounding boards for when I have great ideas or when I have off the wall ideas. They kind of help keep me abreast of what's happening out in the States, because I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. right now. And so it's nice to be able to give somebody a call and just say, hey, I have this idea, or what are you thinking about something that's going on in the building code world, or some proposal that someone has approached me about. So they're really my advisors and people who have experience working, directly with their state government and their legislatures in some cases. And so they just keep me honest and make sure that I understand what the state's needs are, and so that NASEO can be responsive to that. So that's the big thing. Our building committee meets a couple times a year, typically at the NASEO annual meeting, which by the way is coming up in October in Portland, Maine. It's going to be great. We're going to be in person. That's the plan. Following CDC guidelines, whatever they may be at that time. And Yeah, and then we also meet at the NASEO Energy Policy Outlook Conference usually, which is held in February here in Washington, D.C. in most normal years. We didn't meet, obviously, in 2021, but we hope to be back in person in 22. So we'll see. But I see
That's a great summary, Ed. You know, before, since you're still running a little bit ahead, just to kind of reiterate what Heather and Robin just talked about, the size of the money coming out. You know, in the 3 bills that have passed, it's about $5 trillion that has been pushed into the economy by those bills. And what's amazing about that is the total U.S. economy is somewhere around $21 trillion. So roughly 25% of the economy has been pushed out. When we look at the upcoming bills of, you know, a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and then maybe a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill coming through, that reconciliation bill is like 15 to 15.5% of the economy. To compare what that's like, the New Deal back in FDR days, that was about 12% of the economy at the time. So that's the size and precedent. So if we think about the New Deal, we live with those programs today and depend on them. So this is going to be a societal changing amount that comes out. Not just the stuff that's already come out is a societal changing, but even what is coming would be something that would change the way of life for our descendants. So it's really a fascinating time that we live in right now, and it's a fascinating subject. We're talking about a small slice of this. And there's another slice that I suspect you'll probably have a webinar on later. That's the Treasury funds, the fiscal relief funds that's going directly out to state and local governments. But you know, this is just really quite an interesting subject as we figure out how to use it, how to make best use of it, and how to get it out to the proper hands.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity and an incredible amount of money that's being invested in the U.S. economy. It will impact this country for decades. And it's, you know, it is both exciting, and I think everyone in state energy offices, especially those who survive the ARA days, the Recovery Act days, are thinking, oh boy, here comes the tsunami. So
well, you know, it's a great time for the state energy office. You know, we have an incredible value of knowledge in the state energy offices that really has the opportunity to really be tapped and leveraged to some fantastic things in the states. As I've gotten to know a lot of your members in the state energy offices, it's quite impressive how knowledgeable they are about their rules, process, procedures, and what's happening in their states. So I think there's a great opportunity to link the two together. So I was glad to hear you talk about bringing together the state energy office and the education offices, because I think that there is a real need there.
Yeah. I mean, there's, you know, we'll hear more in a bit about how much investment the United States needs to make in the schools and how much has been deferred. But it's, you know, the GAO report that Robin mentioned, I think it was 54% of schools have major upgrades needed. And some of them just need wholesale facility replacement, which can't be done through ESSER funding. But there's a need to be thoughtful about how we approach all of this. So it's exciting to have all the state energy offices on board to talk about this and see what we can do. And I see Anissa's joined us. So thanks, Anissa. Glad you could join us. And I'm going to hand it off to Heather to moderate this session with Tim and with Anissa. So we're excited to hear more, and I'm going to drop back off. But Tim, thanks for, you know, queuing up that discussion. That was a good conversation, and I strongly recommend folks take a look at that American Rescue Plan FAQ. It includes ESSER funding for schools, but it also covers a synopsis of what's available for LIHEAP. It doesn't go into depth in that because you're pretty familiar with it. But I also talked about the Commerce Department's Economic Development Agency funding. There's quite a bit of funding available there, including no less than $300 million for coal communities, which is probably of interest to a number of the states, and other programs as well. So strongly recommend you check that out. There's a lot of money from the Rescue Plan Act that has to be sorted out too. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Heather. Thanks everybody for joining us.
All Okay, we'll go on and get started. So in this session, we're going to provide our state energy offices with information about the ESSER program and the opportunities that exist to put the funding to use for projects that impact energy use in schools. There are around a dozen allowable uses for ESSER funding, and only a few of them focus on indoor air quality, which means that there are a lot of competing uses for these dollars. There are other challenges as well, as local schools have not often received federal funding in the past and may be unfamiliar with the requirements of using federal funding, which we all know can be very complicated and confusing. In this session, we're going to talk through some of those challenges, what we know so far about how the funding can be applied, and we're going to discuss what resources are available. So we will get started with Anissa Hemming, who is the director for the Center of Green Schools at the U.S. Green Building Council. If you want to give us a few minutes of an overview and what you're here to talk about today, and then we will go over to Tim Unruh, who is the executive director for the National Association of Energy Services Companies, to do the same thing, and then we'll do Q&A. So if you have any questions as they're talking, go on and pop it into the chat, and we will definitely get back to it after they give us their intros and first information. So Anissa?
Yeah, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. All right, let me share some presentation slides just to keep it interesting. Can you see those? Yes, okay, great. All right, so as Heather said, I'm Anissa Hemming. I'm the director of the Center for Green Schools. We are a team within the U.S. Green Building Council. A lot of you probably know USGBC. Just in case, USGBC is the nonprofit that is best known for the development of the LEED rating system for buildings, but the broader mission is to ensure that buildings and communities are built and operated in a way that is better for the planet and better for people. And so the Center for Green Schools, we focus on schools, on K-12 schools within that mission. So we really center our work on giving resources, training, providing peer-to-peer networking opportunities for people who work in school districts trying to incorporate sustainability decision-making within their school district programs and policies and plans. So we convene the nation's only network of K-12 school sustainability directors, school district sustainability directors. That's about 300 people across around 180 districts, including 19 of the top 25 largest districts. So that's a network for them it's a free thing for them to join and share resources with each other. So we're a good resource for you in understanding what is going on with school districts, local education agencies, and what they need to do the kind of work that you guys are doing within your states, because they are responsible in most cases for trying to bring energy efficiency, air quality, all that stuff to their districts. They are sort of the coordinating voice often in these districts. So if you're interested in our work, here's how to keep in touch with us. I just wanted to show this so that it's a clear outline of what kind of funding we're talking about related to schools coming in from the COVID relief funding. So this pre-K through 12 public education allocation is the column to really look at when it comes to the scale of funding that we're talking about. This is the funding from the 3 different relief packages, and clearly the rescue plan funding is quite a bit larger than the other 2 packages, and I'm not quite positive that has really sunk in with people who aren't quite as close to the money coming in, but we do understand the incredible opportunity that exists here. As Heather was saying, this money is for all kinds of things within K through 12 schools and facilities, and within facilities, energy work is a piece of that. And even the school districts we've heard from who are allocating quite a lot of money to facilities out of that allocation, it's still in a lot of cases only addressing a tiny fraction of the actual need that's out there. So I know we'll talk a little bit later about possibilities for future federal funds, that kind of thing, but there's a lot of need, and this money is so important, but it's only going to get us so far. But what we have heard from districts that are allocating some of, substantial amount of this money to facilities is that it's allowing them to kind of catch up and do some planning, which is a perfect place for state energy offices to be providing some support and expertise toward that planning. Because school districts very rarely have the opportunity to sort of step back and look at what they need across their system, and what they should be thinking about for the future. So I wanted to make sure you knew about this resource. This is a document that we put out in April about how districts might be able to use the COVID relief funds to advance healthy green schools. So this is schools that align with what we believe are better schools for kids and teachers. And we did this with a partner, Undaunted K-12. I'm just gonna, I think I've got the link in my, oh no, that's the ESSER. I'll paste the link in the chat when I'm done. So this document has, as the name says, 5 principles for the spending of these funds. I'm not going to spend very much time on these, but just giving a little bit of an example. So this one is an obvious one for anybody that has been looking at the use of these funds in facilities, advancing healthy schools, advancing efficient, resilient operations, advancing data planning, all the stuff I was just talking about related to kind of taking a step back and looking across a system. We've been seeing a lot of districts use the money in this way, or plan to use the money in this way. There's also some real opportunities for those who care about green schools in general for some teaching resources and teacher professional development on things that have to do with green buildings and green schools. So energy efficiency is certainly in there. And then across all of those 4 things that I just talked about, there are real opportunities to advance equity in our schools, because we can target a lot of this work to the school buildings and the school location and the schools that need it the most. So there's a real opportunity to frame our decision-making within the context of equity. So this is the kind of stuff we're talking to school districts about right now. I know it's like, it has applicability for you guys, but I just wanted you to see like the kind of thing that we're talking to school districts about for their decision-making, and the guidance document that we're giving. I don't know, because I was thinking our start time was 1:15, so I apologize, I came in just a bit late. I don't know how much you talked about this FAQ document. I know Ed mentioned it, but if you haven't gotten the link to it yet in the chat, I can post that in there. Just wanted to kind of reinforce the fact I have heard from several school district superintendents and school board members that they are still, and business officials, that they're like still not convinced that they can use these funds for facilities. So there's still like a little bit of hesitancy in using this funding for facilities. Part of that, as Heather was saying, is because they're not used to using federal dollars for facilities, and they're not really familiar with some of the facilities related requirements that come with federal funds. So there's like a little bit of hesitancy there, but there is very clear language within the Department of Ed's FAQ about the fact that you can use this funding for facilities. So it's addressed in the first section. It's addressed again. Yes, it can be used for construction. It's addressed again. Yes, it can be used. So there's actually 3 places within this FAQ that the Department of Ed put out that say, yes, this can be used for a facility. So that's just some ground setting as we head into this conversation, that it is very clearly outlined in the Department of Ed's FAQ that this can be used. So I'm gonna stop sharing and pass it back over to Heather. That's just a broad overview to get us started. Oh, and you're muted, Heather. You're still muted. You're still muted. You're muted in the system, in Zoom.
Okay. Better now. Thank you. We've
Yeah.
got lots of questions already popping up in the chat, and I've got a few jotted down myself, but we'll turn it over to Tim first for his opening remarks, and then we'll kind of quiz both of you at the same time. Tim?
Well, Anissa, what a great summary. And my talk is going to echo some of the same things you did, but I have to tell you, the USGBC document, the 5 guiding principles that I know Undaunted also put together with USGBC, that is a phenomenal document. And we've referred to it many times, and we even got permission to plagiarize it for our document because it's so good and reference you. So I thank you so much for putting that together. And Ed, thanks also for the introduction, and Heather as well. I really do appreciate the support we've gotten from U.S. Green Buildings Council. They've done a lot of work for us. And I know, Anissa, you're going to come talk at my annual event and in November in Austin. I'm knocking on the wood here in my office, but I think it's actually plastic, so I don't know if it'll help. But nonetheless, we're all kind of looking for those live events to go back again. And it seems like we were going for them, and now we're not sure. And hopefully we're going for them again coming into the year. So I've got a couple of slides that I'll put up here as well, because I've got to at least match Anissa's slides, right? Let's see if I can do this without crashing something, right? Let's try this one here. Here it is, screen 1. So it all disappears on me, so I hope you see a slide that says NASEO update. That's a nice boring slide. There's the information about us. Okay, so I just want to have that up there so you can see about my membership. I'm the executive director of the National Association of Energy Service Companies, and my membership consists of energy service companies, or ESCOs, and those companies that supply the goods and services to them. We primarily do work in public or government-owned buildings, which includes K-12 schools, which is the subject of our talk today. So what does an energy service company do? I know we've got a lot of state energy offices out there, so I'm probably preaching to the choir, but there might be some that are still not familiar with that. So just to summarize, they do building renovations, and they replace old, decrepit equipment with new, efficient equipment. Often included in this replacement is updated and improved operations and maintenance practices. The ESCO uses the savings from these improvements to finance the upgrades and guarantees the performance. Often they do that for more than a decade. We call this type of contract an energy savings performance contract, and it's legal in all 50 states, with many states having clear processes and procedures for procurement and implementation in place. And I guess I want to be clear is, building upgrades for efficiency make the building better than it was before. It used to be, gone are the days that efficiency meant you had an uncomfortable, cold, dark building. And perhaps some of you might even recall the days of having to go 55 miles per hour on the highway. Well, today we drive 70 miles per hour with cars that are much more efficient and use less gas than those cars that 55 were using back then. And that was all driven by technology. And that same drive of technology is driven building renovations to a new level of quality. ESCOs have been improving efficiency, indoor air, lighting, and overall building performance for 30 years. Hence, it's why I think ESCOs will play a role in helping K-12 schools address the COVID crisis. And since you're looking at my pretty slide, I had to mention my meeting as well. Ed, you got to throw yours in. I know it's not my meeting, but if you want to learn more, we've got a session coming up in Texas that Anissa will be a talker at, and she will tell us some great things there as well. So when I did some research to try to understand the issue, a congressional research report that was issued in August of 2020 outlines that there was a significant lack of data about school retrofits. We just don't really know much information. So I'll throw out some numbers here today. We'll probably hear some other numbers from other people coming out later on, and they'll contradict my numbers, but that's kind of the state we're in and understanding the data. They were able to find some information in this August 2020 report, and they stated that in 1999, there was a study that estimated the cost of bringing K-12 schools into good condition was $127 billion. And this was 1999. In 2012, 13 years later, that number was reported to be $197 billion. So even accounting for the cost of money changes over time, our K-12 schools are continuing to lose ground against the ravages of time. So in normal times, most funding for school facility construction comes from local funds, bonds, or some local funding method that they have. But we are not in normal times. Through these 3 funding bills that we've all been talking about, the March 2020, December 2020, and March 2021, that's $5 trillion. The federal government has allocated about $175 billion for K-12 schools. And as has already been stated, not all of that money will be used for school facilities. But look, even if they did, it's still not enough. But clearly we know that some of this money can go for facilities. The U.S. Green Buildings Council published a document I just mentioned called the 5 Guiding Principles. And on page 3 of that document, it lists some qualified spending of these funds. And I'm not going to try to go through all those here. I think there's a link in there that you can follow and look at that document. But the opportunities are extensive. They cover building envelope improvements, renewable power installation, natural gas equipment replacement, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, or HVAC upgrades, just to name a few. So Ed mentioned that we have a need. There's 54% of K-12 schools need some type of system update. And now we have some funds, about $175 billion allocated. The gap, of course, is of the $175 billion in funds. I've estimated that about maybe $25 billion will go towards facility improvement. And I went through a rather strange way of figuring that out, but it's basically taking some school budgets and looking at how much of the money that they get traditionally gets put towards facilities. And it worked out to be about $25 billion of that total probably would cover facilities. So since $175 billion is for broadening across schools, facilities aren't the only area of need. So obviously this money is going to have some other uses. K-12 schools have had shortage of funding in all their areas for many years. So with $25 billion of funding, $25 billion that we have to address a 2012 need of $197 billion, we've got a bit of a misbalance. And the problem is that $197 billion was 2012. This is 2021. 9 years later, surely it's even larger today. So this is where I think ESCOs can come in and provide some assistance. They can often take existing funding source, combine its impact with that of the operational cost reductions, and they can leverage the facility investment factor to 4 or 5 times what it was. So in $25 billion of federal funding could mean you see between 125 and 150 billion of additional facility upgrades. Now, I recognize that not every dollar spent can really be fully leveraged. That's just not realistic. But there is potential to leverage this money. So it's effectively, we're kind of at a point where we have a choice. We have $25 billion in our hands, and we could go use that, and we could get $25 billion of school improvements. Or we could try to leverage that, and we could potentially see maybe like $100 billion in school improvements. And it's really our path, our choice, which path we want to follow. So a challenge in this leverage approach comes in this form of this thing we call uniform guidance. And it is kind of the nemesis of this whole money. And it is the funding direction that comes out from the Department of Education that tells the state education agencies and the local education agencies how they can spend this money. And the real key is how is this guidance interpreted by state education and local education agencies? Anissa hit the nail on the head. There's just uncertainty of if they can even do construction on facilities in this, let alone use it for leveraging with performance contracts. And so it's just like it's harder and harder in some ways. So remember that federal funding does not normally support school capital improvements. So the uniform guidance, while it's a capable document on how the money might get spent in many cases, it doesn't provide a clear pathway to using energy and operational savings, construction, we just heard also, to leverage that federal funding using energy savings performance contracts. In my communication with federal education officials, they stated in an email to me that they don't believe there's anything in the uniform guidance that prohibits energy savings performance contracts. That's a great statement, but it doesn't do much in an email to Tim Unruh. I can forward that to a lot of people, but it just doesn't carry the weight of them telling the local education authorities that. But yet we saw that they've said that construction is allowed, but yet there's still even hesitancy there. So what we are at was we're at an interpretation standoff. We have guidance from those issuing the guidance that says you can use it. And we have those receiving that guidance that interpret that what they've heard and seen and read to say, I'm not sure we can. So the U.S. Department of Education, which is the owner of the guidance, indicates it's allowed. The language of the guidance makes interpretations of include performance contracts challenging by state and local education agencies. So I know today that we have a lot of state energy offices online, and these offices oversee the implementation of energy saving performance contracts. And as I stated before, they are a wealth of knowledge. I mean, sometimes people don't realize how much they know until they start talking to people who really don't know. And across the aisle at the education side, they know how to train kids, they know how to take care of and create education programs, but they don't necessarily know how to do upgrades to facilities so well. That's where the state energy offices have a great opportunity with the education offices to make some progress. So I encourage the representatives to reach out to their state level education counterparts to educate and guide them on the value and power of performance contracting and construction and making the most of the federal funding they have received. I believe that with a deep knowledge experience in our energy offices and working together, we can form a pathway that will allow utilization of federal funding with performance contracts and give us the leverage to bring our schools closer to that good condition we need. And just to kind of throw in even one more tricky piece is I thought I'd throw this in. This was in my paper in the Washington Post. So this is Virginia, where I live now. But our governor is going to take some of the money that we're not talking about today. So this is outside of the $175 billion for K-12 schools. He's going to take some of the state and local money, and he's going to put $250 million into the K-12 schools and ask them to match it with $250 million for facility improvements to improve the air quality. So even the money we have now seems like it might have opportunity to grow even by something like this. So Heather, I'll turn it back over to you and let you take it from here.
Great, thank you. That was incredibly interesting. So I'm going to go back to a few of the questions that we've had come in. The first one that we had was, are these resources that we're discussing, are they limited to public school districts? Are charter schools included? Are private schools included? What's the flexibility there?
Great question. So the funding for charter schools comes through their authorizing entity. So if they're a state charter school, then their funding would come through the state's allocation within the ESSER funds. If they're a charter that's authorized at the school district, the local education agency level, then they would apply basically through their LEA for the funds that they would be able to get through that authorizing agency. So it depends on where the charter is in the giant mess of our education system. There is funding for non-public schools. There is specific guidance for non-public schools that I can dig up in my email very quickly and paste in the chat. So that is available as well. And there's sort of there's different guidance for them on how they need to document the funds and apply for funding.
Okay.
And Lisa, there's even some funding out there for higher education as well. Mm-hmm. So universities are seeing money come through, and some of that money goes directly to students. I know I've got a couple of students who have received some CARE Act funding on their tuition, but a lot of it then also goes toward the university as well.
All right. Another question that we had was, can you detail the eligibility of renewable energy under these funds?
Do you want to take that, Tim, or you want me to?
Well, I can start, but it comes from your document, really. The 5 guiding principles outline that you could use that, but really it comes down to, can you justify that you have some sort of a reason for renewable power? And I'm going to say renewable power because that was the question, but leave a blank there. And whatever that blank is, you have to find some way that either you're making the building more accessible, more useful, or remedying some problem. It would be kind of the nutshell that I would say. And so, you can say, can I do blank in a school? And the answer is yes, you can do blank, whatever you fill that blank is, as long as you believe you can do a justification that it makes the building more accessible, it makes the building more useful, it makes the building more resilient, or it remedies something you think that COVID has done to decimate the use of that building. And maybe Anissa, you could add that, but that's kind of my look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best opportunity for for justifying the use of the funds for renewable energy is on the side of continuity of service.
Yep.
That's sort of your best case, I think. And there are a couple things that school districts are definitely having success and feeling like they have a good case for that has to do with continuity of service. One of those things is like outdoor learning environments, like being able to carry on school when the school building might not be safe or might not be the best place for students to be at the time. So, there are similar cases for sort of trying to carry on school in situations when the school building is hindered.
This is more of a comment than a question, but we had someone in the chat box make the comment that likely we're all running into or probably going to run into some similar issues around the rules for procurement, because those are often challenging both at the federal level and the state level. And so it seems like some of these projects that are really important and really needed are being stalled over the questions on how to use them. And then and I'm assuming since these are coming through the Department of Education, that there's probably going to be some slightly different rules and regulations than what we're used to from the Department of Energy. So do you have any suggestions on the best way to help schools and school districts know exactly how to be sure they're doing that correctly and they're navigating that as simply as possible?
I feel like, Tim, you should take this one because the procurement issue is really the one that you've been working on because of the confusion around performance contracting.
And before you answer that, Tim, I'm going to tag on another comment and question that just popped up, because I think you can answer them both at the same time, because you did mention an interpretation standoff, and they're having that same issue in North Carolina and would love any suggestions, because you said ESBC is a great mechanism, which is basically a design build with a guarantee, and they would love any input on that, and especially if you have any resources or materials they could use to help move forward.
So I think what you've got to do is you've got to document, because the questions you're going to get on these is not going to come while you have recent memory of the action. When you look at the uniform guidance, there are several procurement methods that are allowed. And it appears as though you can do a procurement so long as you have some sort of a competitive nature to it. That seems to be the underlying need of the uniform guidance. And so what you have to look for is do you believe that the state's procurement policies and programs for performance contracts find a way to fit into one of the procurement pathways? So one of the procurement pathways talks about a non-competitive type approach, but that really is, it looks like it's outlined for like an architect or an engineer selection, because then they are not allowed to go build the project. Well, that kind of violates the way a performance contract will work, because when you select a performance contractor, they develop it and then build that project because they're on the line to guarantee performance. And so it kind of disrupts that. So it really needs to go back to that competitive method. And I believe if you look at the way the state methods work, there is a competitive nature to those. And I believe that those can fit into the uniform guidance. You have to look at each state's process and the uniform guidance. And I know I'm even doing a webinar for North Carolina on September 16th for the Energy Services Coalition. So it's interesting. I did one for Georgia a while back, and it is a common issue of how to do that. But if a state uses a non-competitive solicitation based on qualifications, that process won't work with uniform guidance. There needs to be a competitive nature where you have something submitted and you evaluate some sort of a pricing. That is the traditional federal procurement way it works. When I was back in the federal government, we used to have a process that's how it worked in the federal government. Procurement officials like to see that. They like to see that you did some sort of a price comparison. The ESCO industry is familiar with that type of competition. They can fulfill that and work with a school district to make that happen. It effectively involves doing a preliminary assessment, coming up with prices. It could be pricing on the audit, but there's various ways that they can do that. Many states have a build-up markup price. I know my state, Kansas, has a process like that. I know Lynn Retz is online. I saw her there. I grew up in Kansas, did a lot of my initial work in Kansas. I know their process is a markup model, and that's a competitive model as well and has a competitive nature. And so you just need to look at how those can fit in there. I believe working with your lawyers, you can make that happen. But again, it's just not straightforward, because the uniform guidance is really made more for a traditional design, bid, build process, which is the way we procured projects years ago, but not really how most projects are procured today.
I would add to that we, Tim and I and some others are actively interacting with Department of Ed and others on the federal level that are, trying to make this clearer for states and for districts. And if you keep running into similar arguments and cases against things like performance contracting, like, please stay in touch with us, because it's hard to articulate the case to Ed. Like, Tim had this issue where it was sort of banging your head against the wall because you need like very specific cases where this is what the guidance says, this is why it's causing confusion, and here's how we could fix it. And so if you're starting to understand those pieces of the argument, like, please keep in touch with us, because we need more cases like that so we can actually articulate what the issue is for the people who are working on guidance at Ed.
North Carolina does not allow for a cash infusion for performance contracts. So wouldn't those funds have to be used outside of the performance contracting process?
So I'm going to get my nomenclature for North Carolina messed up, but there's a group that evaluates that, and I think that has to be answered by them. And there's a North Carolina entity that evaluates that, and I can't remember the acronym. It starts with an L, but I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, so I'll just stop at the L. But they would evaluate that, and so that could be true. And if that's true, what that means is you may need to do a separate process with the performance contract running alongside the ESSER funds. And so in that case, the ESSER funds might be a combination project. But again, I don't know if that will be allowed in North Carolina. The key is that if you do retrofits with the ESSER funds, you don't want to lose the ability of the savings that those could accumulate to help pay for additional retrofits. That's the thing you don't want to lose. If you bar that through some legislative or policy interpretation, you're effectively cutting yourself off of additional school retrofits, and you're hurting your schools. So you want to try to find if your rules will allow that, or look at maybe if the rules can be altered or adjusted for that in this particular case for ESSER funds.
All right. While we are talking about North Carolina, Anissa, you've been doing some work in Durham. Do you want to mention what you've been doing there and how that's been being funded or any of that?
I don't think they're using any performance contracting, so I don't know if it would really illuminate the particular question we've been wrestling with.
I think we're just talking about North Carolina.
In general. Yeah. Well, and I should also say, Durham Public Schools has been a real leader in looking very clearly at what's happening in their facilities related to COVID, communicating to their community what kinds of things they might do with the rescue plan funding, and planning ahead for the next several years how they might be able to use this funding and additional federal funding if it comes down the line. It's been very impressive. So really, we've just profiled their work. We haven't done the work. They've done the work. They are using 44 million of their rescue plan dollars in facilities work, and they're working their way through a 6-part plan. And those plans are basically, assessing what's there, doing some like-for-like replacements, figuring out what they can improve as they go, and sort of, laying out what kinds of resources they would need over the next several years. So they're actually using the rescue plan funds to do that kind of assessment that I was talking about when I was talking about the 5 guiding principles. It's a very exciting time for them to take the time to do that. He was telling me that, they have something like the director of capital projects I was talking to, they have something like 8,000 filters that they've had to go through and replace. And by the time their current staff can do nothing but filter replacements, by the time they finish, they have to start again because it's so many, right? So they don't have any time to do other assessments if they're just trying to focus on filtration for COVID. And so the funding that they're using, the rescue plan funding, is allowing them to sort of basically outsource some of that filter change work and do some more strategic work with their staff on facilities upgrades. And I should say, I was saying before, this money is so important to be able to do stuff like that in school districts. But they've done a facilities assessment in the past, and they have $1 billion in need. So 44 million, so great that they've got that to work with. They also have a lot more that actually, if they were actually going to get their schools up to standards. So I just want to put that in context. But 44 million is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that's a lot for them to work with right now.
So Tim, yeah, I know you mentioned your $25 billion figure, and I know there were probably some pretty fancy calculations that went into getting that. Can you give us a little bit of information and background on how you came to that number?
Yeah. So what I did was I went to the there was some funding information. I think the most recent I could find was 2015 of overall nationwide school funding and how that broke down into various budget categories. And while the budget categories aren't always conducive to the analysis you want to do, you can kind of make some inferences about what's in the various budgets. And it appeared as though of all the school funding that there was, that I think it was around 14–15% of it went towards facilities. And then I just applied that back to the 175 billion to come up with my number. So it works out pretty straightforward, and it's not so far off. Again, it's all kind of speculation, but when you look at it from an industry and you're trying to figure out what is the impact this has, it sounds like so much money, but when you start to parse it amongst 50 states and the hundreds or thousands of school districts that are across those 50 states, it begins to be a small amount. And so we really have such a greater need. And that's why I put together the thought of trying to leverage the money. We did a leverage program back when I was at the Federal Energy Management Program in the federal government. We were able to get some pretty astounding leverage in the federal government with the funds that we were able to apply from the federal government. And I think the opportunity is with K-12 schools is also very strong for this.
And can I pipe in on that too? We've done quite a lot of work on trying to assess the need that's out there. 21st Century School Fund, I believe Mary is talking the next hour, right? So they're working on their next State of Our Schools report right now. We worked with them on this one. We co-released the last one with them in 2016. And that was looking at some of the financial data that Tim was talking about. And through Mary's work with the state level school facilities directors where they exist, she figured out sort of what the cost per square foot of school construction is to try to come up with a replacement value for school facilities within the states. And then we looked at what over the lifetime of a school, if you count on a school building being around for 50 years, they're usually around for longer, but a schedule of capital repairs and replacements that would be determined along a 50-year timeline, then we could figure out what should be spent on these school buildings based on their square footage, based on how many schools there are. So what should be spent every year to keep those schools up to standards. And then we looked at how much is being spent on those school facilities, and we looked for the gap. And so the gap in 2016, the gap every year was 46 billion each year. So that's sort of on top of the deferred maintenance kind of number that Tim was talking about. So there's like, how far are we behind? But then there's how far are we every year behind, right? So that's what the State of Our Schools was articulating. And this next report that Mary is working on right now should be out next month, and it articulates even bigger annual gap because we keep getting behind, and we're building more schools because we have more kids and we have shifting population centers and that sort of thing. So there's a changing landscape out there.
So speaking of the shifting population centers and the differences, I'm in Alabama, so we have a very large rural population and we have a lot of rural schools.
Yes.
And unfortunately, a lot of those buildings are significantly older than I am. They were old when I was in school, and it's been quite a while since then.
Yeah.
So what do we know about those, and who might we offer assistance to as a state energy office, and what are ways, and I guess kind of couple with that question, we keep talking about the lack of clarity or concern about whether or not these are really allowed for the things that we're talking about. And I think you're going to run into that even more in rural school districts than you are in your urban school districts, because there's even less familiarity there. So what are ways that, I guess the question is, how can we work with rural school districts in particular, both to get in the door with them and to help them see that this is really a thing they can do?
Yeah. So important. I mean, starting with the first question about what do we know about the schools, we know very little because there's no national data about the condition of school facilities. All we have is national financial data. So we know how much is being spent, but we don't know what it's actually yielding and what kind of condition schools are in. I do know that the new State of Our Schools report, one of the headlines there is going to be about rural schools, because we saw from the last report that was a story that needed more data around it, because we know that that's a problem, because school facilities are funded through property taxes and rural communities don't have much of that. And so it's just this real gap in resources for those school systems, especially where the state is not picking up the slack from a state funding perspective. So where school districts are completely reliant on local wealth, of course, you're going to have awful facilities in rural locations. And that is what is happening. So I think there are, any state office has a role to play in helping small rural communities, because those are the ones with less expertise, less time to spend in trying to figure out how a system works like that, fewer people allocated to figuring out federal grants and that kind of thing like that. There's definitely a role for state energy offices to play. I think there are a couple of options. I mean, sort of help with procurement and sort of collective bargaining, collective bargaining is the wrong word, but collective purchasing agreements, that sort of thing is like definitely a role for state energy offices to play, trying to get rural districts to join together to do some of this work. I'm sure Tim can articulate how that might work for performance contracting work, if that's even possible, but our rural districts are really where outside resources are most needed. The bigger school districts are going to have the resources they need to figure out mostly what they can do with this money.
So that's a great answer. The rural school districts are challenging to go address. In my work, when I did work as an ESCO, I found you can find school districts that are as small as one single school building.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that would be the extreme on the small size, where they may have one community that has an elementary school and that is their entire school district. The challenge you have with that school district, and even the ones that may have a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school, is, again, as you pointed out, that they don't have the expertise to deal with this. They're shorthanded already, but then you try to come in and figure out the paperwork of federal funding. And then once you figure out the paperwork of federal funding, you figure out the process of doing a construction project. Well, construction projects for those in the construction industry are easy. If you don't do one every day, they can be quite daunting to go figure out. And then sometimes in a rural location, you may have challenges finding contractors to do the work as well. And there's a lot of opportunity for the smaller school districts, not only in helping the school district itself improve, but also the local community benefits, because usually the work benefits the local community, with local contractors getting work, buying the parts and pieces locally. So you have the opportunity to gain there as well. You mentioned the state energy office is helping. There's also project facilitators that can come in and help. And that's a private function that helps you navigate through the process of doing a project. And there's a whole industry that supports, and I'll say they do a lot of support for K-12 schools as well. Energy service companies can have challenges with the smallest school districts, because sometimes they won't go chase a project that is so small that they don't believe they can make the proper money on it. But for smaller school districts, don't discount your opportunity. I've done work at fairly small school districts. We've got some energy service companies that specialize in that and do a great job at that. They also can help you understand the process before you ever sign a contract with them. So that also can provide assistance.
Sorry, I got sidetracked getting ready to answer a question.
There were some follow-up.
Go ahead.
There was a follow-up question to this. There was some conversation about cooperative purchasing agreements and funding going to intermediate units, which in my mind is ideal for helping rural schools. But there was a question, and Tim, I'm not sure the answer to this, the funding going to intermediate units, and whether funding going there would satisfy this competitive requirement, because the money might be competitive
Right.
in coming to the intermediate unit, but then the money, the services going to the districts would only be this one service provider that was selected competitively at the intermediate unit level. Do you have any sense of how that would?
Yeah. I'm at a loss as well. It's not quite certain that the cooperative purchasing agreements provide the competitive nature. I think it depends on how that selection occurred and how the cooperative purchasing group does their selection of who does the work.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say you can't do it, but I think it depends upon how they do it. The uniform guidance seems to be its underlying theme is they want to ensure that you've had proper price competition to ensure that the money you spend from the federal government is the best value that you can get. That seems to be the underlying nature. And so I think what you have to do is in an interpretation process is recognize that that's its underlying nature. And then they've got all these rules to try to micromanage you in doing that. That's what I'll say. And you have to figure out, how do I think I've satisfied enough of these rules that I believe I've gotten through this? I think I saw one of the frequently asked questions that they came out with later in the game talked about that once you do a design, that design has to be sent back to the state for approval before it's competitively solicited. Well, so that the answer assumes you have to do it in that process. And so I've seen interpretations, people reading that saying the answer, the way they've worded it, means that you have to send it to the state and then competitively bid the design, which would completely exclude any type of a design build process, which includes ESCO and design build. But just because the answer is worded that way does not necessarily mean that's the way the uniform guidance states it. You really need to look at what is the intention there. The intention is they want to have a review. If you've already done the competitive portion beforehand, you can pre-satisfy that, what it looks like. But again, this is all interpretation. It'll come down to the attorneys and the districts and how they want to interpret this, and if they're willing to look at it in the way that needs to be looked at and how they want to procure this.
Well, and I should say state departments of ed are the ones that are putting out, the guidance for their individual states. So
that's correct.
As a partner to your state Department of Education, you can have some conversations with your colleagues in that department about what's allowable, help making sure they understand what these contracts typically look like, getting them comfortable with thinking about how to give guidance on facilities. I mean, they don't know anything about facilities, most of them. Some of them have directors of facilities at the state level, but not, only about half of the states even have somebody at the Department of Education at the state level that has something to do with facilities. So,
right.
You are a good resource for them as they're trying to figure out what their guidance should be on this. And we know you don't know all the legal implications of everything, but you do know stuff about energy efficiency, facilities, air quality work, all the things that they're probably thinking about. So I want to encourage that connection.
Yeah, and as state energy office, you also know about the construction process and the contracting process.
Yeah,
you know how that works because you live it and experience it and see it happen all the time. The state energy office does not do that ever.
The Department of Ed. Yeah,
the State Department of Ed, like all the SEA, the state education agency, doesn't have any knowledge of that. The local education agency probably has a little bit, but the state really does not. And they're the one making the rules. And when you look at the rules and you make those interpretations and you don't have the experience of how you go out and procure design build contracts, it's very easy to exclude most processes of construction, let alone performance contracts.
Yeah.
So remind us real quick, are there requirements on these funds for match and Davis-Bacon and historical preservation and NEPA and all of those really fun things that we got to know so well during ARA?
No, not all of that. There are requirements. There are some requirements, but it's not all of that. There's not a match, so that's important to know.
There is Davis-Bacon.
Yeah. I would just encourage people to look at the list of requirements that they've included. Yeah, because it's different than ARA.
It is.
so, it's important to not jump to conclusions about what is necessary there.
Yeah, it's easy to get spooked looking at the list. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That was a great answer, Nisa. That you've got to look at the list. I don't want to say something, but like the Buy America is very soft in the language.
Yes.
There's some mention of it, but it's not a real strict, hard requirement. But you need to read that and see what it says. Davis-Bacon is a strict, hard requirement. That one's pretty solid. But all those other ones you mentioned are very soft and differing. So I would look very closely at those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would think the historical preservation, especially as we've talked about the ages of schools and structures, is definitely going to come into play a good bit, depending on what those requirements are. And I have a question that I had jotted down that is slightly, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit not quite facility specific, but what we in Alabama have participated in the building operator certification program. We've had a lot of people from our departments of education around the state who have gone through that class, because it really does help them operate their facilities in a much more efficient way and to learn things and understand things. I know this specific funding is not necessarily for that, because it's for improving the facilities themselves, but is there anything in these funds that could be used for some of that education that can help increase the long-term efficient use of the facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And this funding is, to be clear, not like about facilities, right? Like facilities is an allowable use of this funds, and professional development for staff is also allowable use. There's a really broad really broad list of funding, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to educate school districts that it can be used on facilities, because the facilities, is one in a giant list of allowable uses for this funding. But professional development is absolutely in there. Yeah.
Great. All right. So one last question before we get ready to wrap up, and this is kind of for both of you. We're obviously talking specifically about the COVID relief funds right now, but it sounds like there are definitely some additional funds that are probably coming down the pipe at us, or some maybe that are already out there that we just haven't quite discussed yet. So what does that look like, and what does that mean for both the state energy offices and for school districts?
Well, I can start off with that, and then Anissa can close out and tell me where I'm wrong. So we've got two big bills that are out there floating around in La La Land. One is called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and that one is it's talked about being a $1.2 trillion bill with $550 billion in new spending. And I know from the layman in me, I was like, how do you do that? Because I think it'd be great if I could go out and spend $100, but only actually spend $55. I'd love to do that. Well, what they're doing is they're redirecting some of the money that's not been spent in some of these previous bills and some other money, and then they're waving their hands and snapping their fingers, and voila, they get 1.2 trillion of allocations, but only 550 billion of new money. In that 550 billion and 1.2 trillion picture, there's $500 million for K-12 schools, which, if they were to give that to Anissa and I, we would be fat, dumb, and happy and clicking our heels down the yellow brick road. But when you give that to 50 states with all the school districts, and you do it over 5 years, that's $100 million a year. If each state got an equal allocation, that's only $2 million a state. And then you think of maybe 100 school districts in there, and maybe they're going to get 50 cents each. I don't know, but it doesn't matter that much. But the difference in this money from what we've talked about is this money is going to Department of Energy, while the other money went to Department of Education. And that's a key difference is that this money is going to be a competitive grant, is what it looks like in the text, rather than just a broad allocation. In some ways that's good, in some ways that's bad. Because it's a small amount, it's probably good because it can make a difference to a few places. But it means there'll be an application process. I'm not sure in energy where that will be run. I'm going to suspect and guess that it's going to run through the state energy program within energy efficiency, renewable energy. But that's not assured, but that would be my guess. And so this probably will have some involvement from the state energy office, would be my guess. The other part that's in there is an energy efficiency conservation block grant program for $550 million. Again, it's an M million, not a B. So it again is thin money going out across a broad country, but it does have a difference in the ARPA funds, EECBG, in that it does allow performance contract to be mixed with it. The legislation is stated that. And so that's there. What we don't know is where this bill sits. It was like a sure thing a couple of weeks ago, and now it's on shaky ground, and we're not sure where it stands. And so I don't know that I'd necessarily go buy the farm on that one yet. The other one is this thing we call a reconciliation bill, and it's the 3.5 trillion one that was talked about being like 15% of the economy, and comparing that back to FDR's New Deal was like 12% of the economy. So it's a big, big bill. And that one there, it appears there's a lot of things about clean energy in there and less about efficiency, but we don't know the specifics of that one yet. And we can talk to you about all kinds of things and tell you that, but by the time we get done talking, it will have probably changed. So I'm going to stop talking and let Anissa give you the real deal now.
That's about right. I mean, the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed the Senate, so it's sitting with the House now, and that funding, you know, the $100 million a year for energy efficiency. There's a lot in that bipartisan bill for schools in general. You know, schools are included in the EV charging stations language. There's $5 billion over 5 years for school electrification of school buses. So there's a lot related to schools. But as Tim was saying, $100 million a year for school facilities, for energy efficiency in school facilities is not going to get us very far. But you know, with something, what's being talked about as part of the reconciliation bill is based on the Reopen and Rebuild America Schools Act, which has been around for a long time, has a lot of support in the House and Senate. And that bill proposed $100 billion in grants and $30 billion in bond authorization for school facilities. And that's over 5 years. And that funding would go out by formula to states, and then states would determine how to determine what the sort of highest need school districts or school projects are. And that plan would go back to the U.S. Department of Ed for approval. So all of this would be sort of states determine how to target that funding. That's how it's currently written. We don't know what's going to get through reconciliation. And Mary's popping on and has been working on that as well. So she'll talk about that next hour. But that funding is absolutely up in the air. It's with the Senate committees right now trying to figure out what to allocate what to, and basically that funding is in the same pot as universal pre-K and free community college, all these like very popular proposals. So we'll see how much is allocated for school facilities, and any outreach that anybody on this call can do to encourage representatives and senators to support money for school facilities would be great, because as we talked about, there's a huge and growing deficit in what we're spending on school facilities.
Yeah, that's right. And, $100 million a year may not be much, but it does at least get us started. And as my grandma used to always tell me, it's better than a poke in the eye.
That is definitely a true statement. So Tim and Anissa, thank you guys so much for being a part of this webinar today. We've definitely gotten a lot of really good information and had some really good questions asked and answered. And I'm sure that we will probably be bombarding Ed in the end with all sorts of follow-up questions that he may turn around and send to you guys. So we really appreciate it. And now I will turn it back over to Ed to get us through the next steps of our webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Anissa. We really appreciate your insights. Thanks for jumping on and sharing your thoughts and experiences. And Eddie, like I said in the chat, I think all of ARPA dollars are supplement rather than supplant state funding dollars, but we'll have to follow up and check with Jeff Genzer on that. So I will get back to you. I do have programmed a short break, so everyone can check their emails, since this is a rather long webinar, and take care of any other bio needs, as they're sometimes called. So we will do that, and then we will jump back in with another session. Sorry, I'm sharing my screen and then multitasking. So, so we're going to take a short break. Then we have another great panel coming up. And I saw that Mary Flardo had jumped on. So thanks, Mary. Good to have you. And yeah, so a couple minutes for a break and respond to any urgent emails and so on. Thanks. Mary, do you want to do a quick sound check and video check?
Here's my unmute. Did you hear me? You didn't hear me when I said sure.
All right, so we can hear you loud and clear. Are you still where you can?
Yeah, here. Let me see where I am.
All right, we got you bright, loud and clear. So.
All right, so we're good.
Yep.
And then I'll just join back a couple minutes before 2:30. Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ed.
Thanks.
Ed, if you want to move me over to an attendee, that'd be fine as well.
Okay, we'll do right now. Right, so break time's winding down. If you're listening from across the room, come on back to your computer. So we've got another great panel that's going to be hosted by our Building Committee Co-Chair, Robin Yocum, from the state of Nevada's Governor's Office of Energy. And just a reminder, this is going to be focused on putting ESSER money to work in the field. If anyone has just jumped on, we're kind of focused, or we are focusing on the American Rescue Plan that was signed into law back in March, but there's quite a bit of other funding that is available through other COVID relief bills, not to mention the infrastructure bill, which passed the Senate last week, and the reconciliation budget, which everyone in DC is watching, and I think a lot of folks across the country are watching to see what happens. But regardless, there's quite a bit of money coming out into the states for improving K-12 schools. And so we're gonna keep focusing on that. So if you haven't already got relationships with your state and local school districts and educational agencies, now's a good time to develop a relationship. And if you have one already, then it's a great time to deepen it. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Robin to introduce the panel. So thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Ed, and good afternoon, everyone. So this panel will examine some of the ways that the ESSER funding can be used to improve the indoor air quality of schools, but also providing energy efficiency benefits to those schools too. So we will hear from the U.S. Department of Energy. We're going to hear some examples of how funding has been used in Wisconsin and some insights on the need for investment in school buildings and how state facility managers might be engaged. So this afternoon, I'm joined by three wonderful panelists. We have Amy Heron with the U.S. Department of Energy. She is the team lead, acting commercial buildings integration program manager. And then we will hear from Mary Filardo, who is the executive director with the 21st Century Schools Fund. And last but not least, Heather Fegum with CISA 10. She is the assistant director of facilities management. So with that, Amy, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Great. Bear with me for a second while I share my screen. Did that work? It seems like it might have.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So hi, I'm Amy Heron. I am with the Commercial Buildings Integration Program within the Department of Energy, and also working very closely with Nate Allen from the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Group, who you may work with if you are working with schools often or even through the State Energy Program. I am going to review a couple things that you heard in the last session or on the last panel about why school buildings are important to energy, why school buildings are important to buildings. So the GAO, which is the Government Accountability Office, they are actually a third-party objective research agency that reports to Congress and is directed by Congress. They conducted a pretty robust study of school facilities and came up with some, I think, very, very interesting and saddening numbers about what the state of our school facilities are. And of particular interest to us in the Building Technologies Office at the Department of Energy are that so many school districts and school buildings need upgrades, especially to their HVAC systems. And some of the language that we've been using around the benefits of energy efficiency and the value stack associated with upgrades to schools are related to resilience and safety, health, and other, I think, cost savings, all of the things we normally talk about when we talk about energy efficiency. But with schools is sort of a double down effect. And we already heard about the 2016 State of Schools report, and waiting with bated breath for the next one to come out. Thank you, Mary Filardo. Hopefully we'll get a little sneak peek of what she's coming up with. But the outcome of that is that there's a huge investment that's needed in school facilities. There's new technology that needs to be integrated in order to enable healthy school classrooms, healthy administrative facilities, and also energy efficient buildings and safe buildings and buildings that work. So this is just a little bit of feedback that we've heard from the rest of the buildings world. So not the schools world, but the energy efficiency buildings world. Lots of strong support for working with schools. And then of course the opportunity here is very large, not just because schools consume 140 trillion BTU of natural gas and contribute significant greenhouse gas emissions, so the decarbonization opportunity is very big, but there are 100,000 public schools, 13,000 school districts, and 3 million teachers and millions of students who go to school, can see these upgrades, understand energy efficiency, understand buildings, and take that home with them and drive more change at home. So that's the opportunity that we're looking at. In addition to, I think, some worry about the implications of added ventilation strategies to energy efficiency. So of course, you know, COVID brings this heightened awareness of ventilation, and we're already starting to see some guidance that's come out regarding how to operate school facilities and also other commercial buildings with heightened ventilation levels, which is right and safe. However, we want to make sure that the opportunity to access energy efficiency with investments related to those strategies are part of the picture. So, you know, we have this COVID thing happening. We have schools that need lots of upgrades. And then we also have energy that costs money and can, you know, create other problems such as blackouts and things like that. So I think, you know, a couple, like I said, value stack discussion items here. Schools are resilient centers. They're the places that we shelter in emergency and disaster situations. And when we have resilient centers that are failing, that's not very resilient. So it's, you know, in addition to that, there's a comfort associated, a comfort issue associated with inadequate facilities and air quality problems that come along with that. And there's recent work that we've uncovered, and we will be publishing a literature review of the benefits of healthy and efficient schools that associates teacher retention with better schools. So all of this stuff kind of brought together in one place points us to the direction of we need to up our game on schools in the Building Technologies Office, and of course working with the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Office, the SEP program. And there are some of your favorite people's quotes up there. Thank you, Mary and Anissa, and thank you, Anissa, for your presentation earlier. That was wonderful and very informative, I think. So of course, the American Rescue Plan with tens of billions of dollars. And then in the same kind of tranche of legislation that passed in December, there was also direction to the DOE, Department of Energy, Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy Office Division to coordinate better on a school program. So that means recognition, financing information, coordination, and hopefully some technical assistance. So we've been thinking about that and working on that and trying to bring all the different pieces and moving parts together. Like I said, COVID, school investment opportunities, and kids going back to school now. My kid's first day of school is today. So that's all happening right now. So we pulled out some of the state energy or the state emergency relief plans, which have to be submitted to the Department of Education, and specifically those state plans that have some reference to HVAC upgrades or ventilation and IAQ upgrades. And I want to give a shout out to Renji Chan, who's on the line from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, who consolidated some of this information and is on the line to provide any kind of technical answers that you might have about schools and school ventilation. But in addition to that, the Department of Education a couple of weeks ago released this new guidance on how to operate schools safely. Of course, filtration, which, you know, we heard the Durham example where once they finished replacing all of their filters with MERV 13, they'd have to start back over again. So that's just one piece of the puzzle. And it's a very complicated puzzle as well, which is part of why we have brought lab experts and truly our national laboratory IAQ experts to the table to start thinking about this and thinking about the optimization of energy and indoor air quality as it relates to schools. So the most specific state plans that reference HVAC, ventilation, and indoor air quality are Delaware, Kentucky, and Michigan. So and then we of course pulled out the amount of funding that they expect to spend. Again, kind of nebulous. We'll see how, you know, the rubber hits the road, but on specifically indoor air quality and energy system improvement. So HVAC is a major energy consuming system in buildings. The comfort systems of buildings consume a lot of energy, especially if you've already done your LED upgrades with lights and you have Energy Star appliances. Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning consume a significant amount of energy. So we should pay attention to those in schools. And if we're going to increase the ventilation in school buildings, we want to make sure that it's actually providing the benefits of that extra energy consumption. So that's why the focus on indoor air quality and sensing and control and monitoring. So I'm going to share these slides and I'll let you run through all of these and take a look and dive deeper if you like, but there are some sample plans. And I'm gonna get to the point of why I'm talking to you today. And that is because DOE, and especially the Building Technologies Office through the Better Buildings program, has run a good number of adoption campaigns. And those are really targeted like at LED lights or maybe rooftop units for schools, you know, upgrades to facilities, kind of equipment focused. But in this case, we decided to launch a campaign around the adoption of better upgrades in schools. So it's not actually a technology specific focus of what we're doing. It's actually a school focus. So what we're doing is partnering with the Department of Education, partnering with the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and partnering with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab to provide direct technical assistance, recognition, and resource development for schools. So schools and school districts can go in and sign up to participate in what we are calling a campaign in order to access these resources to, you know, talk to other schools about their best practices. And we're hoping to also do, like I said, some resource development, which might include bulk purchasing, technical specifications, so that some of those procurement barriers are overcome. And then of course, recognize best practices, exemplary projects, so that others can, you know, replicate, like the Durham example that was provided earlier. So as I mentioned, I'm gonna share these slides. The email address for the campaign, the sign up link is there. We have a website that has a whole bunch more information about what we're doing and where we're focusing. But with that in mind, these are kind of the 4 critical areas that we think are going to help balance indoor environmental and air quality with energy consumption, and then also provide those additional value stack benefits like better transparency into school building operations, indoor health conditions, current energy consumption, even potentially enable participation in demand response programs and other you know, decarbonization efforts that are going to hopefully be rolling out into the market as well. So these are the 4 categories that we're going to be recognizing exemplary practices from schools, and hopefully that will grow into a lot more exemplary practices and case studies and resources to share more broadly with districts and states and school stakeholders generally. I don't want to take up too much more time because we have a lot of other people to talk and lots of good stuff to share, but these are just a couple of other things that are happening within the Department of Energy related to schools. Of course, we're watching that $500 million grant program as well. But we have the Better Buildings Challenge for K-12 schools, which is a great program that's been around for a good number of years now, highlighting all kinds of resources and best practices on an ongoing basis. That will continue. We've consolidated a lot of different information about financing energy upgrades in schools in case some of that money doesn't flow directly to your district or your state or whatever, so that you can understand better how to access money to make those investments. We are doing a auditing pilot so that you can get a better handle on the school needs, so more of a strategic approach to upgrades across your schools. And that's using a tool that we have developed called Asset Score, which is designed to be the supplement to Portfolio Manager. So if you do a Portfolio Manager benchmark, Asset Score actually helps you dive deeper into your buildings and know where to make investments more strategically. And then of course, we're going to be working with Ed and EPA to convene school stakeholders more strategically, to align messaging, to better understand needs and barriers, and hopefully design solutions. And then determine our strategy for working better with rural and disadvantaged communities. I really appreciated that question about rural schools because we've been grappling with the same question. Schools who are unable to, implement, basic facility operations definitely cannot apply for funding from DOE, and will have a hard time, I think, accessing technical assistance from us and others. So we're trying to be more strategic about how we engage with rural and disadvantaged communities. And so more coming on that, but if you have ideas, I'd love to hear them. We're looking for that information right now. And then of course, we are hoping to expand some work on how we can enable schools to decarbonize their facilities and also grow a good career path for more students in the K through 12 and higher ed levels. So more coming on that as well. And that is it for me. Thank you so much. Sorry I took so much time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody else.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was really interesting. You guys are doing some really great things, so thank you. Next, we're going to turn it over to Mary.
Hi, folks. I'm really glad to be here with you. And what I want to do is sort of bring to you a little bit of information and insight into what's happening with state officials on the education side. So at the 21st Century School Fund, one of the things that we have been really privileged to do is support the National Council on School Facilities. And that's an organization that started about 8 years ago now, with state education facilities officials. So these are the folks in the departments of education and in some cases in individual state authorities who are funding school facilities. They're often reviewing plans or doing other kinds of approvals, but their biggest job is really writing the checks. And just to give you an idea, a little peek out of the state of our schools that will be coming out in September, is that in the last, well, from fiscal year 09 to fiscal 19, states funded about 141 billion in school facilities construction. So the states, they're definitely players. They're not huge. They only do about 22% of what the districts are funding, and the federal government does less than 1%. So this part of what we see strategically is that the states really need to grow their capacity, not only in funding, but also in technical assistance and other kinds of accountability and support for local districts. One of the other nice little factoids is there's about 14,000 regular school districts, a little less than that, but half of them have fewer than 1,000 students. So, as Amy was correctly identifying as a real challenge, there's a lot of small districts, and these small districts really struggle with being able to do any kind of major modernization funding, and also having the technical support to be able to do some of use some of the new technologies, whether in renewables or in some existing sort of computer assisted controls and other things. So we're really interested in trying to strategize with you all at NASEO on how the state facilities officials on the ed side can be working closer with the state energy offices. And, data, I have to say, is one of the first things that the states need in order to, get on top of their issues. Not just data on energy consumption, but data on the conditions of their systems. There's been a lot with COVID, a lot of interest in trying to do assessments. So ventilation and air quality and filtration and all of those elements. So data and information is one, but the other piece is there's a lot of planning that needs to be done. And folks have heard me constantly worry about the tail wagging the dog in educational facilities, which is whether or not, people just decide they want to get rid of lead in pipes and somehow that's the only thing they're focused on, or asbestos in materials, or just, ventilation or energy. That these are environments that are designed to support a really complex set of activities and and people, you know, from very young children to, you know, medically fragile students, and you know, as well as obviously all the adults in the environment. So the educational activities, the support services, there's so many things that happen in schools, so we want to make sure that when we're looking at energy and air quality, that we look at it holistically. So we're not going in and putting, you know, rooftop units on roofs that leak, or frankly, buildings that should be torn down. So we're, you know, not only the data, but engaging energy managers and people who really kind of know the world of energy and resilience can help with the planning. But the planning in the context of the mission, which is obviously to educate the next generation of people in this country. So I want to stop there, and, you know, happy to answer, and, you know, any questions, and, you know, kind of do what I can to bring the ed folks into the energy tent in a way that makes sense. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Mary. And we will be doing questions and answers. So you guys, everybody that's on the webinar, if you want to pop some questions into the chat, after we hear from Heather, we will go through Q&A with all of the panelists. So Heather, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Heather Fagum. I am Assistant Director of Facilities Management at CESA 10 in Wisconsin. CESA is a cooperative educational services agency. So we have a unique role of kind of straddling the line between working directly with the schools. We do not have any students at our facilities, but we are a consortium that works with school districts around the state of Wisconsin and helps them with their facilities management needs. Our team also works with Focus on Energy. We are an implementer for school and government solutions, so helping schools actually use the utility funded program of Focus on Energy to improve the efficiency of their schools. We've seen some interesting things in the past year or so on ESSER funding. It's been kind of a roller coaster ride, as you can imagine, with schools, because they have been getting different guidance with ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. The allocations for them have all kind of gone out a little differently. They're not really sure how much money they get until right before that funding year in Wisconsin. So it's been a challenge to plan with that money and how they're going to use it. We have been working with our schools to make sure they understand the different ways they can use that fund or that money to improve their indoor air quality, and in association improve their energy efficiency of their building. We've been working with a lot of schools to, if they're looking at larger projects, put in, you know, new condensing boilers or energy efficient chillers. And we actually did some like reviewing of actually buildings and trying to help them identify how much money they will actually save based on this. So for example, in Wisconsin, an average building is about 200,000 square feet, and they're going to save about $7,300 with a condensing boiler versus a regular efficient boiler. So we've been using that kind of messaging to help schools understand that equipment that they install can not only improve the energy efficiency of their building, it will, or in the indoor air quality of their building, but will return their investment if they choose an appropriate piece of equipment, an energy efficient piece of equipment for years to come, right? The condensing boiler will last upwards of 20 years. Focus on Energy has done a few studies modeling different buildings. We did a benchmarking study back in 2018 that identified the total amount of energy that schools use, and then also identified how much schools will increase their usage with some of the CDC's recommendations. And being very clear, we completely agree with CDC's recommendations for increasing the ventilation. That is something that schools definitely need to do to keep their facilities safe and healthy during this time. But just looking at the amount of outside air that they are bringing in, and then some of the additional strategies that have been suggested for schools, Wisconsin schools alone will spend about $5 million additional on just energy, with about a 10% increase in natural gas. So Amy mentioned, I think it was 140,000 or 140 tera BTU. I think that was the number, I wrote it down, of natural gas. So if you can imagine, there's going to be a 10% increase of energy usage on just on those outdoor air strategies. And again, I'm in Wisconsin and it gets pretty cold here in the winter. So it very much is going to be different in Florida or in some of the southern states. But here in Wisconsin, we have a lot more heating need than cooling need. In fact, if you look, I'm a physics major, so if you look at the psychometric chart, it actually shows that Wisconsin is in the comfort zone for kind of comfortable outside air about 10% of the hours in the year, which isn't very much. So you need to condition that air to keep your students safe, healthy, and comfortable, of course. So spending about $5 million additional every year in order to do some of those strategies for that CDC recommended. And that isn't including any additional equipment like the filtration systems or anything like that. So it's definitely been a challenge, and we've seen a lot of people wanting to do different things, put a lot of money towards ESSER, or a lot of their ESSER money towards their equipment, and that's been, boilers, HVAC, control equiment, really making sure they're maybe adding air conditioning if they haven't had that in the past, again, Wisconsin. And then also we've seen a lot of testing and balancing. People wanted to do commissioning, making sure the equipment that they have is working properly. So when they do increase their outside air or improve their air quality with whatever equipment that they have, you actually know that the damper is opening more. So yeah, there's been a lot of interesting things happening in Wisconsin schools, and again, competition in funding as there is for nearly everything. But there's been a lot of good work done and a lot of good projects coming through.
Thank you, Heather. That was awesome. All right. So again, if anybody has any questions for our panelists, please pop them in the chat. But I do have a question. I have a couple of questions for you guys. Mary, I wanted to find out from you, what common mistakes do people make when thinking about the scale of the K-12 infrastructure?
Well, I mean, the problem they make is understandable because there's so little national data on it. But part of what they do is they underestimate the size of the infrastructure and how it relates to other infrastructure in this country, for example. So one of the things that most people don't realize, but in terms of state and local capital outlay, public education, K-12, is almost the same as highways. If you add higher ed in, it's bigger than highways. So it's an enormous sector. There's now, we count when we add Puerto Rico and the outlying areas and the BIE schools, we get 8.1 billion gross square feet of space. It's just an enormous sector that spends over 100 billion a year already, even with all the deficiencies that we have. And this is why I think it was Tim in the previous one says, well, 500 million is not a poke in the eye. And that's true, but 500 million on 100 billion a year and an 85 billion a year gap is not modest even. I mean, it's a pilot program, and hopefully the Department of Energy will be able to kind of help set the standards and help districts really understand what's possible. But from a systemic remedy, we've got much more to do. And so that's part of the problem with not getting the scale right, is you get the remedies. The remedies are too puny for the scale of what the need is. And so we keep trying to push folks on it and say, we can do something about this, but we can't do anything about the real problem if we don't let it into the room. If we kind of pretend that it's just that one room schoolhouse that we can all put up on a weekend because we're used to raising barns or something. It's not that. These are very complex built environments, and there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of health safety, life safety provisions in them. They're unique to their geographies and to their not just broadly speaking in terms of climate, but in terms of if it's in a city or if it's in a rural area where there's bears in the schoolyard. So these are complicated places, and we owe them a lot more respect. And I think part of what we're seeing now is there's a little bit more respect for the complexities of housing 50, 60 million people on a daily basis in really healthy and safe environments. And I think we haven't had the proper respect for what's involved in that and how we all need to be involved in it at the federal, state, and local level.
Great. So Amy, speaking about DOE, what types of support and resources are available from the commercial buildings program for the state energy offices to work with our school districts?
Yeah, and that actually I was actually going to try to supplement Mary a bit there and say, state energy offices have this energy expertise that maybe the schools, state offices of education, or there are lots of different names as I'm learning, don't have, and also don't have a real focus on energy. They pay the bills and they make sure the schools can open and the kids are warm or cold or whatever they might need to be. But they don't necessarily have that energy expertise that the energy offices have so much depth in. And so we're really hoping that this NASEO, that Ed can help us, as Mary said, bridge that gap between the energy offices and the state education offices. And then there's also that added layer of the local districts and LEAs that are making funding decisions as well. So I'm new to the schools game. I'm an energy person and a buildings person, but schools are more complicated than commercial sector buildings. So it's a challenge, but it's really exciting because there's so much passion there. So I think if your state office, energy office hasn't yet delved into the schools arena, it's a really interesting adventure and really fruitful as well. And then I'll get to the question now. So the resources that we can provide are, first of all, help with strategic energy planning. So if you have an understanding of what schools are in your school district or in your state, we can help you identify the ones to target first from an energy perspective. So Heather, thank you so much for bringing up the increased energy that schools might actually see, how much more money we're going to have to pay for schools because of potential ventilation implications. That we can help with that. Like, we can help see which schools ventilation is a real problem that we could really target some upgrades to help with energy. And I was hoping, Ed, you could unmute Renji for a minute so that she could say hi, because she's our IAQ expert, has been working on schools in California through the Berkeley lab and has done a huge amount of research on indoor air quality. Renji, can you say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Yay, great. So Renji is on the other end of everything that we're doing through the campaign, and with her team, we'll be providing technical assistance to school districts and schools, facility managers on, a variety of different topics. But we'll also be collating sort of the information that we've gathered in order to help us develop better resources. So Renji, what else would you say?
This is a great learning opportunity for me. So I'm from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We're located in California. So I know a lot about what our California energy commissions are doing, but I'm less familiar with what other state energy offices are doing. So it's really interesting to hear the excellent examples from Wisconsin. I'm going to follow up with you to learn more. I know that just want to shout out to, I know that Michigan is offering direct assistance to schools who was doing HVAC assessment. So that's another great example. And we're trying to replicate that more so we get more and more schools getting to understand what the opportunities are. And perhaps also to Mary's point that we don't just do COVID prevention measures, but can we push a little bit further, whether using alternative financing mechanism, also address decarbonization while we have this opportunity to, just push it a little bit more, not just do that one thing and meeting one challenge at a time. A lot of us school in California, we're looking at the forecast, bad air quality is coming back with all the wildfires that's going on. And so our school are not just facing, which is no COVID right now, but there's really a lot of challenges our schools are facing in terms of indoor air quality, outdoor air quality, heat waves, and really just taking this moment to think about how we can use what we have to help them do more.
So Renji is going to be on the other end of the line for the questions, and we're going to be strategizing every week about how we can enable better upgrades in schools, better decision making using investments that are coming down the path, whether it's federal, state, local, or other foundational, whatever. And the Renji's right. There's this problem that we have with air quality now as well in so many of the Western states, with CDC recommending more outside air. If the outside air is worse than the inside air, how do you manage that risk, and it's all these different problems compounding. So yeah, so we're here to help.
And Amy,
good, thank you.
Sorry, you make a great point with bringing the outside air in, because a lot of people are saying then add your MERV, higher MERV filters. Well, a lot of the higher MERV filters don't actually work in the existing infrastructure that they have in place. So then you need to do additional things like improve your fan speed, or it's a lot more complex than just sticking a new filter in if you're trying to bring some of those, do some of those getting those outside toxins out too.
And that's what we're going to be. So the pathway to do that. So say your rooftop unit can't fit a bigger filter, it doesn't work, whatever, because the air pressure drop, we're going to document the pathways to make that solution work, and hopefully share that more broadly with other schools so that they can do the same faster, better. And one thing that I kind of said, but I wanted to just kind of emphasize, there are schools in almost every community. And so if as a state energy office, you're looking to access and enable better energy justice or equity, which is a major focus of our work right now in the federal government, schools are out there. Schools are the place that people go in a community, that almost everybody goes in one way, shape, or form. So I would just encourage you to, that's just as another reason to start more work with schools.
Now, indoor air quality isn't, a new topic. So how were you guys thinking about this? And this is for all three of you before COVID, and how has that changed?
I'll start here with our team in communicating different, we call them like non-energy benefits to schools or just to customers in general when they're improving their energy efficiency. Indoor air quality was always something that was a little bit on the sidelines, that it is going to improve, especially with topics such as retro commissioning, right? You're improving your existing building infrastructure and making sure you're improving the indoor air quality of your facility. So it was always something on that, especially with retro commissioning. But it wasn't as big of a topic with changing out large systems or that you got into very often. But it's starting to be a big topic, as you can imagine. So I think that topic has definitely shifted.
And if I can jump in, I think some of your schools may already be familiar with EPA IAQ 2 for schools. And indoor air quality, it goes beyond ventilation, filtration. It covers topics like, what kind of cleaning product using? Are you addressing your radon problems? Do you have mold, dampness and mold problem? Are you addressing them properly? It goes beyond that, but and we think EPA IAQ Tools for School has done an excellent job in pulling together resources for school to have. And so recognizing they being the champion that, our campaign is working together with EPA IQ Tools for School, and also looking from the energy side. EPA also have the Energy Portfolio Manager program that's been going on for a long time. Lots of schools using that platform. So from our campaign perspective, we want to engage and use our partner resources as much as we can, so the school hears one voice. We hear in this COVID pandemic, they hear guidances from this organization, that agency, and just bombarded with all this messaging. So moving forward, being a little new to the school community, we want to partner as much as we can with EPA, also with Department of Education. Amy?
Yeah, and I would just say that, I mean, again, this was my tail wagging the dog sort of metaphor. I am old enough to remember the 1970s school construction boom, and it was during an oil crisis, and we ended up with just windowless schools, with schools with open plenums that were, passing just the most horrendous thing for air. And when in the early 2000s, we surveyed the Chicago public school teachers and the District of Columbia public school teachers about their facilities, we found that the air quality was their biggest concern. They identified that they thought they missed, 3 to 5 days of school just because of the environmental conditions in the school. And I was speaking to a group of about 500 teachers in Washington, D.C. and doing a presentation, and they were politely bored sitting there listening to me talk about school facilities. And then I said indoor air quality, and the room erupted. They started talking at once. They started talking to each other. They told stories of the person they thought had died from cancer because of this sick building. And I had no idea the level of tolerance that these teachers had been putting up with on their working conditions. And, as the buildings around them had deteriorated, and they just, I think, felt powerless in relation to their working environments. And so it's been a long-standing problem, and energy and health have not been real great partners in it. And I think that part of what we have, in this moment now is a really exciting opportunity to have energy and EPA and education, sitting down together, but we're not all at the same spot, right? There's a lot of learning to do, and there's a lot of capacity that we need to build and how we work together. And again, as I said earlier, I think that there's a lot that we can do at the state levels. And we need to make sure that, state by state, that we've got little, the tables are set, and the treats are there for folks to talk to each other and really think about what education and energy can do together to address the conditions in the school buildings and grounds.
Mary, I just wrote down, bring the treats. So I'm going to make sure I do that, because that's what I want to. No, but I think you're exactly right. And in talking, about teachers and I said, we just finished a literature review about the drivers of energy efficiency in schools. And teacher retention is directly associated with better school facilities, better classroom environments. And there is some controversial research on student testing as well, unclear whether there's a connection, but definitely on teacher retention. So there's an investment that we make in teachers that can, we can reap direct benefits from upgrades to schools in keeping teachers longer so that we don't have to reinvest in there. So anyway, thank you for reminding me to bring the treats, Mary.
And so Amy, if Robin, is this okay? Can Amy and I in front of everyone? So I think the research you're probably referring to where it's sort of, you know, iffy on school facilities and academic performance is a University of Michigan study that was funded by IES. And, you know, having reviewed that study, one of the things that folks will, I think, be able to relate to is that money is only partly a model of condition. And I know this because in working with State of Our Schools, I'm sort of using money to say, oh, no money, you've got a school in poor condition, a lot of money, you have a school in good condition. Now we know that's not true. And you know, that it's more complicated than that.
Yes.
And in that study of Texas public schools and the money that was spent on them, essentially the theory was just, you know, it was like ignored the fact that it was a building with people in it. It was just money going in and then test scores going out. And it was actually a really poorly designed study for what it was looking at. I mean, it used the, you know, the econometrics to look at it, but it should not be referenced as kind of throwing doubt on that there is a mediating relationship. It's not a direct relationship. You know, if you send somebody into a really great building and you don't have any teachers there, you know, you're probably not going to get a great education, right? The issue is whether or not, you know, all things equal, whether or not if you're in a poor building as compared to a good building, it will make a difference. And there's study after study, you know, in this country and in England that show that the building, all other things, you know, held constant, socioeconomics, you know, educational programming, that the building really will be a barrier or an asset to the academic performance of kids and the quality of instruction that you'll get. So anyway, just saying, Amy.
Got it. Thank you.
That's a really important topic too, because I was on a call with about 29 district administrators in our area, and every one of them said that they are going to be starting the school year without a full staff because they're having such a hard time getting quality teachers or getting teachers at all. So that's a really big topic right now of keeping staff, retaining staff, getting them in a healthy environment, along with students improving test scores. But like you said, there's a very big correlation with having the right staff or having enough staff and improving test scores, and your building definitely fits into that.
It's fascinating, and it's actually, you know, it's amazing because we've gone through this last year and a lot of the teachers have left or, you know, or don't want to work in the schools. So, you know, that's a really good point. So Mary, what do you think we as energy offices or energy people, energy folks can learn from your examples of the IAQ issues that you have already dealt with? Because there's a lot of demands for this ESSER funding and other money that will be invested in schools. So what kind of lessons do you think we should take away from this?
Well, I mean, I think let's just talk at the state level first, okay? Because one of the things that I think would be really helpful for the state energy offices to do is to reach out to the state ed officials, and I'm happy, Ed, to provide you with all of their contact information for each state who there is. Now, there's some states where it's hard to find anybody, but most states have someone who's designated as their facility person, and see whether, I mean, if the energy offices have any capacity to help them in any way. One of the things that we see is these state facility offices in the ed departments are tiny. They're just not very big. They don't have much capacity. They don't have much funding. They don't have many people, right? And so they have kind of a standing within their world, but often not much they can bring to it. So if the energy offices could go to them and say, and I don't know what the capacity of the energy offices are. I suspect that it's more than some of these facility offices in the departments of education, but could say, we'll help you with, maybe it's assessments, right? Of maybe it's just the energy assessments, even with a health kind of lens. And, we'll make that available to districts on a, as needed basis or whatever. But to find a way to connect to them. In some cases, like the Energy Commission, I keep, threatening on this one, but the Energy Commission in California has better data on school facilities and energy than the California Department of Education. But the California Department of Education, they should have that information so that when they're at the table with the head of the state agency, they're able to kind of represent those issues and concerns. And quite honestly, they're not right now. And so I think the first thing to me would be, Robin, to look for, is there something that the energy offices can do, essentially to almost like auxiliary staff to some of the state education offices in order to get better information and technical assistance out to the districts. So that would be one thing. Then the other thing is that I think that the state energy offices should listen to the state ed offices about the kinds of projects to bring forward to Department of Energy on the energy projects. And so that there is a, some kind of criteria, some sense of what options are going to best advance a holistic agenda, right? I mean, it may be, when I was calculating how much money 500 million was, if you just took the rural high poverty districts, it's 87,000 a school. And what could you do with 87,000 a school? And I was like dismissing it, but frankly, an official in California said, oh, we could get solar generators for our rural schools. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. And so, but anyway, what I thought is that if the ed people and the energy people got together at the state level, they would come up with a kind of set of what might be, priority kinds of options for the Department of Energy as they're, looking to, hopefully fund that, one finally passed, hopefully, infrastructure bill. So those would be the two things.
So we had a comment in the chat, and I actually really agree with Robin Boyle. She said, if you could help connect the state energy offices with the right people from the state ed offices, that would be really helpful. The issue I've faced thus far is that my request for info is falling on deaf ears, and I wonder if I'm not reaching out to the right people. And I echo your comment, Robin, because I've also tried to reach out to our Department of Education, and they're just not interested in working with us on energy stuff. So, Mary, if you can give that information to Ed, who can pass it along to all the participants, that would be fantastic.
I'm happy to. There are some tough states, because Robin, aren't you from Nevada?
Yes.
Yeah. So there might be a different, like the Gwynn Center maybe, rather than the State Department of Education.
Right. Yeah. There's the Gwynn Center for sure that I work with. So, it's exciting, at least. And speaking about capacity at state energy offices comparative to the education offices, my office is 12 people, so I know that a lot of the state energy offices are quite small, but we want to help, and we want to make sure that our school districts, get improved and and have the technical assistance that we can provide with, you know, our knowledge and helping them because they are the educators. So let's see, Samesh just put in the comments, MSSEO did a webinar for the Massachusetts Department of Education, or maybe that's not Massachusetts, on using performance contracting and other energy efficiency financing mechanisms for schools. Mississippi, thank you, pertaining to ESSER funding, and that was to your point, Mary. So I just wanted to say that. You know, and actually speaking about energy and education and the challenges that we face there, Heather, with your work with the Wisconsin school districts, what questions do you have most frequently from the school energy managers that you work with, and how do you develop resources to help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get a lot of questions about that have kind of brought up or bubbled up from their communities about, are you putting in UV filters? Are you putting in portable filtration systems? What are you doing to, you know, add to the building to improve your school, to improve the safety for our students? And what we have been really trying to educate people on is putting those additional systems in is more of a Band-Aid and is actually increasing your outward facing maintenance requirements, because you're going to have to maintain all of those additional units. We're not saying that that's a bad thing, but we have been really trying to focus on getting schools to utilize their existing equipment, or if they do have plans for helping them plan for improving their infrastructure that they already have, rather than adding portable units or classroom units or UV filtration and those kind of things. So a lot of our schools are really trying to figure out, you know, we heard this on the news or the salesperson told us this, and trying to find a balance between here's what these products do, but here's what you could do with your existing systems. Here's some additional ideas that you can do to improve. We have been working with a lot of our schools to try to do just more education about their building systems, putting them through what we have. Wisconsin manages a couple different education opportunities for what we call practical energy management, which they can kind of look at their existing systems and figure out what they should be improving upon. Or another one is building operator certification, so that they're really getting a better knowledge of their existing systems, and then additional equipment or additional education on how they can improve their existing equipment, or what kind of capital infrastructure improvements they can make. So those are some of the things that we've been getting a lot of questions. Everyone's kind of interested, as you know, human nature is to look at those new shiny things, but really focusing on what you already have and how you can improve upon that.
Fantastic. And talking about, you know, improving on what you've already have in your school districts, and this can be for all the three of you, whoever wants to answer, you know, how can ESSER funds be leveraged to address some of the backlog of the maintenance issues that we have in schools? You know, because, I mean, as you guys said, there's schools that have been around for, what, 100 years or longer probably at this point. And, you know, they do have limited funding to fix some of that maintenance issues. So what do you think about leveraging some of these ESSER funds to address that?
So one of the bigger school districts in Wisconsin, Milwaukee Public Schools, is actually looking at all of their buildings, and they want someone to test and balance all of their buildings. So that's a really great example of how you can do that. And they're trying to, they're kind of taking a blanket approach. We're going to make all of our buildings better, not saying this building needs to, you know, improve their HVAC system. This building needs to improve controls. They're saying, let's test and balance all our buildings and figure out how we can improve all of them. So that's one example.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. The more you understand about what's happening in your building, whether it's through sensing or better thermostats or, you know, controls. I know it sounds really smart and complicated. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but we heard a story about someone who had a smart thermostat installed in their small business and tore it off the wall and put it on one of those round old, you know, dial versions because they did not like it. So, there's something to be said for the smartness of things and how that can help you understand better where to make investments. And that is all across capital and asset investments to, you know, just changing, you know, your filter in your HVAC unit. But I also think there's, you know, are windows open that you didn't know about, or is there a leak somewhere that is, you know, behind a bookshelf. So these are things that you can understand better once you have better information about how your school's operating. And not only that, you can also document the benefits of the improvements that you've made. So you can bring that back to, you know, the school officials, all the state, I think state energy offices know this really well, but if you can document the energy savings, the cost savings, you can take that back to your, you know, your governor or whatever, and just show how much benefit you've reaped from this smaller investment. So I think that's what you get from data.
You know, I think on the question that's, Robin, that's in the chat on how much of the ESSER dollars are being used for things like commissioning and balancing and as opposed to capital projects, I think it's pretty variable. But one of the things that I think is important for us all to appreciate is that this money hasn't actually been around for very long. It's very new, and school districts at the state level and at the LEA level haven't had federal funds for school facilities, and with these federal funds are some, you know, different rules of the road, right? They, whether it's on Buy American or Davis-Bacon or, you know, reporting and auditing, it's really new territory for local school districts. And so they're struggling a bit with wanting to make sure they do it right. The other thing is that, you know, we, at least at the National Council and with the 21st Century School Fund, have been encouraging folks to be flexible, you know, with the boards of education about what are their priorities and what the dollars can be used for. So that sort of narrowly defining it just in terms of ventilation and COVID might not be the right thing. There is language in the law that says for the health and safety of occupants, basically, or children. It's fairly broad. So I mean, there have been folks that have said, well, you know, could we, you know, add a portable or a wing on a classroom because we're crowded, and, you know, this would make it easier to socially distance. So people are trying to figure out how to solve the biggest problem that they have pre-COVID and with COVID. And I think, frankly, that we will find that we'll get the greatest value if we really do assess holistically and prioritize. And obviously the health has got to be, I don't know that there's any community that's going to be satisfied with, you know, a fancy new, you know, dance studio when the kids can't attend, right? So we know that health will be prioritized, but I think that looking at that along with, you know, their issues that are longstanding or that they've, you know, been trying to solve is going to be important. So I think what we hopefully will see, and again, I think the energy offices might be able to help, you know, leverage, which I appreciate, Robin, the notion that they're not huge, you know, staff either at the state level. But I think actually the two offices working together could leverage really each other. Is that to the planning that should be going on right now is going to be very important, not just for now, but you know, over the next 3 years when the ESSER funds are available, but then hopefully into the future when, you know, we should be seeing some other federal support for our school buildings and grounds.
Now, do you think that the state energy office's experience with navigating federal funding is actually a value add that could help open the door for broader cooperation between
Absolutely.
the state energy offices and education agencies?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea, Robin. Just that alone, if they say, well, these are, we get federal dollars for these kinds of things. This is the way we do our record keeping. This is what they ask us about. This is what we do. This is how we manage this. This is how we, I would, frankly, be happy to engineer a call with the state directors and some of your officials just on that topic, because they are really struggling with that. They kind of don't know, what to tell the locals. The locals don't know quite what to do. And then I think that would be, frankly, a great topic. If you all have that experience to share, because you all have had federal dollars, right?
Yes, we continue to get federal dollars.
That's just nice.
Mary, that was a really good point, that it's really new money, because I think what we've found is that the projects that have gone through have been capital projects that were already in their plan, right? So it was projects like, we're doing a new boiler this summer, and this was, the summer that's ending now. I shouldn't say that, but I'm in Wisconsin, remember, we think to winter. So the projects that were already in the budget were the ones that they were like, oh, we can shift this money over to my ESSER funding, and then I can use the money that I already had kind of allocated for this capital expense, this new boiler, these new controls, or those kind of things. They kind of just shifted the money over and used the ESSER money. And again, how Wisconsin's money comes through from our state is a little bit different, because we have free reign of how we can spend our money. So they just kind of shifted the money over into ESSER. And you did something different with that. But moving forward, they're then using those dollars to, I think it's going to be a really big competition on, especially, particularly in Wisconsin, what we're going to do with those money, how we're going to use ESSER money. Should we use it for facility upgrades? Should we use it for adding teachers, or keeping teachers, or, doing portable classrooms because we want more folks, social distancing. So there's a lot of competition for the funding. And I am foreseeing, I think it'll be really interesting, but there being not hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace their HVAC systems. It's going to be, let's test and balance, or let's do retro commissioning, let's optimize our current systems, because there's other priorities that if you look at a school's strategic priorities, unfortunately, energy efficiency usually doesn't make it in the top 3. So, we have to meet them where they're at and do their strategic priorities, but then also supplement with how can energy efficiency play into those.
And you guys work with, obviously, at the school district. So how do state energy offices work with either our local or our state offices and make this appealing to them, make this something that they actually want to do, where it's not just, at the bottom of the priority list of doing energy efficiency?
Well, I think that there is, in the same way with ventilation, people are getting that when they ventilate better, that, as Heather, pointed out, that there are some increased energy costs, and they'll want to manage that. But I think that we're just not in a place where people are going to ignore energy, either from a cost perspective or from an environmental perspective, in the planning. And the problem is, of course, that school districts, particularly now, are feeling overwhelmed with how do you manage a whole process of infection control in your buildings, and where the ventilation may be part of it, but when you have such virulent strains, really how much are you affecting that by putting in a MERV 13 filter in. You know, I think we're in a very difficult spot, but I think this is where, you know, we have to address the longstanding issues, and, you know, with the data, with the planning, and I think that we'll find that having that data and those plans will mean that as people address emergencies, they'll be more thoughtful, they'll be more considered. And I think to the extent that the energy folks can kind of help with those, you know, assessments, data, and planning, they'll find that those considerations, those priorities, those values will find their way into projects as they go forward.
I'll just add that we've been doing a lot of research on the same question at DOE. How do we work better at the community level? And some of what we've heard is that it works best when you have a long-term trusting relationship, of course, which is like so challenging because it takes time. But also this concept of leading from behind and valuing the time of the local, you know, kind of entities, the school district, because they have such limited capacity to do things, that making sure that you're, instead of asking them for things, offering them some benefit, bringing the treats, and maybe working through conduits of people that they would normally go to ask questions about energy, to ask questions about ventilation, whether it's their contractor networks or their parent-teacher associations, or, you know, things like that. It's kind of funneling information to people who are have that interest and are paying attention to the issue at hand. And I know from working with a lot of different businesses that there's a huge amount of chaos and confusion about guidance that has come down about ventilation. And so sort of just putting yourself out there as maybe we have some knowledge that isn't out there already and can help answer some of these questions to gain some of that trust and make a longer standing relationship. That's just what we've been hearing. We'll see if it works.
I would also suggest working with, if you have in your state an association of school business officials. That's a really good way to kind of get into a trusted relationship. We have, Wisconsin has a Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials. There is a ASBO, which is just kind of a national, there's a specific ones in each state, but Wisconsin has a really strong facilities management kind of department or division of that. WASBO is what we call it. And getting in with that group has been really beneficial to either do speaking arrangements or promote different strategies to improve your energy efficiency or energy efficiency and IAQ. So that's a really good direction, as well as if you do go through like association of, it's called AESA, Educational Support Agencies. That's another way to provide the material to trusted partners.
Yeah, and I would say also it would be worth even just penciling a nice little note to the chief state school officer, to your, to the chief at the Nevada Department of Education, just saying, we're available, we're a sister agency, I don't know, is that person elected in Nevada, or is that an appointed by the state board of ed?
I don't think it's elected. I believe it's appointed.
Yeah. Like Wisconsin elected, California elected. I mean, they're pretty political, some of them, mm-hmm. But others, not as much. But I think even just letting them know you're there with some interest and capacity to provide assistance to their offices. It's, it may be that, you may be surprised. I think it's often good just to get that in the record officially, right? From one state agency to another.
And I think that could work for a lot of states. And don't quote me on the position. I'm not sure if it's elected or appointed.
No.
So
I
just putting that on the record.
Yeah. No, I get that.
But We are actually at time, ladies. So I just want to say again, thank you all three for you sharing your knowledge and information with us. I think this has been a wonderful panel. I am definitely going to go back to my computer when we're done and start looking up who those people in the Department of Ed are that I can connect with and start building those relationships, because this is some fascinating times and great funding coming down for our schools. So, and I'm saying this as I'm staring out at a orange sky right now because of all the smoke coming from California. So, you know, this is some great timing for indoor air quality funding. So with that, thank you guys again, and I will turn it back over to Ed.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Heather. We appreciate all of you being on board for the call, and that was phenomenal. So I penciled myself in for some closing remarks, and I was, you know, tracking the conversation that we had and trying to think of what I might say. And, you know, it's clear, I think we all know, everyone's mentioned that the GAO report, and I'll send a link to that to everybody on the call at the end, that cited, you know, an estimated 54% of schools need significant work. I think there's a stat that specifically calls out how many need HVAC work. So we know that the schools need this help. We've heard that I think we're going to have more success with the indoor air quality message than with a direct energy efficiency message. And we need to find ways to meet the school facility managers and school business association or school business officers kind of where they are and understand their needs. And so that may be just using state energy office experience, working with federal funding as a way to open the door, like, hey, we can help you out with that. And by the way, we also know how to help you, you know, lower or at least manage your energy expenses. We've heard from some states that they're really worried about demand charges when states start cranking or schools start cranking up their ventilation systems. You know, Michigan or Wisconsin in the middle of the winter, if you're trying to just dump in fresh air, that gets expensive. It gets cold, right? And same in Nevada when it's hot in September when we go back to school or May. And then, as you noted, there's the wildfire issues of if I'm trying to put in fresh outdoor air, but there's a wildfire outside, what am I doing to the indoor air quality by putting in outdoor air? It's not fresh air at that point. So, you know, Mary, I noted you said there's 50 to 60 million people in our schools every day. So not only when we make these upgrades, you know, not only do we provide a direct and immediate benefit to the State Energy Office constituents and the residents of our communities, members of our communities, whether they be teachers or students or the folks who work on site. It's also, you know, a demonstration facility where we can demonstrate the future of energy technologies and what works and help them to kind of understand where technology has advanced to and what we can do in terms of climate solutions and energy efficiency and all these other things. I'm just trying to, you know, find some other points. So if energy offices have data on the school department or on the school facilities, like you mentioned, Mary, that CEC has, just data sharing, stuff like that can be very helpful. You know, last fall we had a similar webinar where we had someone from Vermont on, or not from the State Energy Office, but from the Vermont Energy Efficiency Investment Company, VEIC. And the state of Vermont had done a pretty comprehensive inventory of their school buildings and had a really good picture before the pandemic arrived of what was needed, and they could roll out upgrades quickly because of that. So that's something, a lesson we can learn and exchange with the school districts. We also talked, you know, about the opportunities to use performance contracting and leveraging the money. You know, I've been throwing around the top line number from the American Rescue Plan of 122 billion, and I think it totals out to 170 odd million, if I'm remembering correctly, for, excuse me, 170 odd billion from all of the COVID response programs before you add infrastructure or the reconciliation budget. So there's a lot of money, but as Tim noted in our first session, maybe only 25 billion of that is going to go to facilities projects. And we've heard that's a lot, but it only goes so far. So finding ways to leverage private dollars to make it actually go further in the states is probably going to be a really useful thing. And as we've noted again and again, there's still that infrastructure bill and the reconciliation budget, which might deliver more funding, a lot of it through the Department of Energy, a lot of it through the state energy program. We're talking about, I think, now I just blanked. I hope it's a couple $100 million. I'll have to, I should know that off the top of my head, but it just slipped my mind. So I can't remember if it's 200 or 500 million, but there's a lot of money coming through the SAP program. There's a lot of money through energy efficiency conservation block grant funding. So a lot of that will go to schools and help improve schools across our country. And establishing those relationships with your state and local education agencies now, and helping them to start thinking about what they can do, the energy benefits that they can accrue, in addition to improving the learning environments for the children of their community and for the teachers and school staff that work there. There's a tremendous opportunity here. And by starting to plan now, starting to develop those relationships now, you can be in a really good place when everything starts to roll out. So I just encourage you to keep all of that in mind, start developing those contacts. The idea, Mary, of reaching out with handwritten notes, I thought that was great. A letter from the director of the energy office to the chief school officer. I think that's a nice touch. It's a great idea. And we'd be happy to work with you to work more on facilitating that connection and just saying like, hey, like we said, we've got experience with federal funding and you could probably use some help. So we're happy to provide that. Heather, from your presentation, I got that some basic resources on how to make the most of what is on site. I think that's a really great tip as well. And let's see. Yeah, just the 3 years of planning. There's so much to be done, finding data and figuring out who to work with. So we'll have more to come on all of that. I thought this was a really great workshop. Thank you all for being a part of it and for all of your insights. We'll send out a lot of resources after this to everyone who attended, who registered. We have a recording that we'll put up later on. And so, yeah, thanks. This was wonderful. All right. I am going to check. I don't see any last questions. So thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.